And we are live. I'm Justin, the Lunatic Libertarian, and we are here with Mike ter Maat, a hopeful presidential candidate of the Libertarian Party. How you doing tonight, Mike?
Oh, I'm doing very well, especially to be on your program, Justin. It's a great joy to be with you. I'm glad that we got to meet in person at the convention, and so being on your podcast now is a lot of fun. It's bringing it full circle. Thanks for that.
No problem. I'm here to promote liberty for all, and obviously, the Libertarian Party is the largest liberty promoting party out there, I believe,
Yeah.
that's really trying to leave people alone and get the country back on track. Why don't you let the people know a little bit about yourself, those on YouTube and those that will listen a little bit later on Spotify?
Well, thanks. You got that right about the party. You certainly can't count on either one of the other two major parties to help us out, even one iota. So we need to get into all that. I'm running because I believe that I can help make a change both in the party in terms of the process that we follow in terms of nominating a candidate. And I believe that the kind of campaign that we're putting together can really make a big difference in American politics on the other side of the nomination. My campaign is quite a bit different from what you've seen the Libertarian Party in the past. We have a very professional team already in place, expanding this week in terms of professionals on staff. We're going up to about a dozen as of next week. Myself, I'm a different kind of candidate. I've had a career in public service and public policy, actually two careers. I was a professional economist for a couple of decades. I was a police officer for 11 and a half years until about 18 months ago as a second career. So as you might imagine, I spent a lot of time talking about criminal justice reform. I spent a lot of time talking about reforming the way we manage police officers in particular. And that comes from a background in not only law enforcement, but as an economist. I believe that the right solution is to bring market forces to bear on those industries where they are not now. And not coincidentally, those are where we have the biggest problems. Police work and teacher unions, the way schools are run and the way teachers are managed is another good example of that. So we are running a program that's very policy forward. We believe that the right answer on the other side of the nomination process will be to run a campaign that is heavily invested in policy. Our program, our platform is called the Gold New Deal because we're promoting a new relationship between us and our government. As we like to say, between us and the government that we will tolerate. And that has not been the attitude up until now. And that's part of our problem. So this is a collection of the most transformational ideas. Folks in your audience can read about them if they're so motivated at goldnewdeal.org. Don't go to goldnewdeal.com because they'll try to sell you something, which is not a bad idea, by the way. I'm a big believer in gold, but it's the wrong website. Go to goldnewdeal.org. And yes, you can go to miketermaat.com and see all about the campaign itself and link from there to the platform at goldnewdeal.org. And we do believe that this is what it's going to take to differentiate us from the Republicans and the Democrats. I don't think we've done a great job of that in the past in terms of running national campaigns, presidential election campaigns. I think that we've made the mistake of trying to seek common ground with Republican and Democratic politicians when we should be differentiating from them hard, do so in the context of public policy, yet at the same time finding common ground with Republican and Democratic voters, not their politicians. I think most Americans have a libertarian leaning. We need to be able to tease that out, help them identify that in themselves, and help them find us. You need to present a stark, clear, differentiated choice so that people can recognize you as a unique and different choice and recognize that we align with that libertarian streak in each of them. So that's what we're all about.
Do you think that Americans are on the verge of just getting rid of the two-party system? Because from what I see on social media, and I'm not allowed on a lot of platforms because I was speaking too much. It was way before even the pandemic happened. But when you look at the social media that's going on now and how much people are seeing through the BS that has been
Yeah.
provided to them over the past 20 some years, and they're just seeing straight through it. And people are tired of the bureaucrats that weren't elected running the lives and making all the
Yeah.
decisions for the American people, and just saying, well, you're just going to have to grit and bear it. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are just done with it.
I agree with you. COVID is a major turning point, but I think that there are others as well. And I think that for various different groups of Americans, it's a different issue. For example, I spent a lot of time talking about our anti-war position, our anti-war leanings, and our anti-war feelings. And I recognize that in a lot of Americans, a generation ago, I think you would have to say that most Americans were still on board with pretty much anything the White House told them, which of course is how Afghanistan and Iraq were sold to Americans, not because they necessarily all agreed it's a really good idea, but because the White House was able to convince them. And I think that credibility has been lost, a credibility that I think people like you and I would argue should never have been there in the first place.
Right.
To which the White House used to have it, whether it was a Republican or a Democrat, it's gone now. Now, I think if you were pro-war, you would have a very difficult argument to make today by comparison to 20, 25 years ago, because I don't think that there really are examples that you could point to where the American public would say, that was a good idea. That particular military intervention was worth it. It may have cost us billions, or in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, trillions. It may have cost thousands of lives, or in those cases, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and Afghani lives. But it was a good idea anyway. Not too many Americans would say that, nor would they say that about other examples. I don't think they would say that about, Libya, Syria, whatever, fill in the blank. And I think for that reason, there are more Americans than ever before ready for a real crisp differentiation from the past and from the past parties. And for other people, it's different issues. People want to hear about police reform. I think people are sick of, on the left, defund the police. People just throw up their hands and say, we don't know how to deal with police, and so we ought to get rid of them. And people on the right who are like, well, back the blue no matter what, we're in their camp, support your local police. I'm a cop, right? And even I don't say stuff that dumb. Sometimes there are changes that you got to make, and reform is hard, but it's necessary.
And the process that we have here as a constitutional republic is supposed to be long and drawn out so that the arguments can be heard from the constituents, and then have a policy passed or a law passed. And I think that when we get into the language of policy or law, or a police officer is a policy enforcer and not an actual peace officer anymore, it's more of how much revenue can we create, which is just more a theft from the hardworking Americans of the country. And it's just, every single dollar is taxed no matter what, and it's taxed I don't know how many times. I have lost count of how many times a dollar is taxed, and it really doesn't matter to me anymore, because I think the financial system is about to have a worldwide system happening. I'll call it. I'm not going to say anything else about not going to use.
Well, it's hard to know how that's going to play out, but I agree with you. It's going to hit an inflection point, and something's going to change.
Well, I don't see it happening. That's where it's going to be expected. I think it's going to be a surprise for everyone. I think that they've placed in, they have the psychological placards there for, well, we shut down this bank, this bank failed, this bank failed. Now, what's going to happen with the really, really big banks? But I mean, it's such a accumulation of problems to try and solve for 340 million people. And what would you think is the mindset behind a person that believes they can lead that kind of population to have some kind of nuance, to where if you don't take my stuff and you don't commit violence against me, and we can cooperate to have a cohesive society.
I think that Americans naturally lean to a libertarian way of thinking about social policy. I think that Americans are naturally not in a Democratic Party sense, but in a true sense. I think most Americans are socially liberal when it comes to public policy. They don't want a government up their butt. They don't want a lecture from the right. They don't want stupidity from the left. And I think that Americans are therefore open to a libertarian style message that's going to help us take a lot of traffic away from the Democratic Party, because I think that they have overplayed what hand they had and badly played it. We used to say, I shouldn't say we, but a lot of us remain Gary Johnson fans in the sense that he's a nice guy. He meant well. And, you got to respect someone who puts the effort in. So I don't mean anything negative personally. But if you're out there saying, I'm fiscally conservative like a Republican and socially liberal like a Democrat, you're not actually participating in the presidential election process the way you should be. You're not differentiating yourself. You're defining yourself in the context of other parties. And parenthetically, you're lying to people. We are not socially liberal in the way the Democrats are. We don't run around canceling each other because we demand a unified ideology. We just don't. That's not how we behave. We argue, we punch each other in the face, and we go get drunk. And that's the way adults ought to behave. And we're not fiscally conservative in the way that Republicans are, because they want to defund things they don't like. They want to overfund the things that they do like. And they want to lecture you about how you should feel about the difference between those things. A Democrat may argue that Republicans are more pro-war than they are, but none of them are fiscally conservative when it comes to the Defense Department. None of them are fiscally conservative when it comes to the real meat and potatoes of budgeting, which is to say, get the entitlement programs under control. So if you say that we're fiscally conservative like a Republican, you're lying to people. Republicans are not fiscally conservative, and they certainly don't feel about things the way we do. So that's a long-winded way of saying I think that there is some there, but we're going to have to work for it. We're going to have to help people recognize the libertarianism in themselves by putting out our principles and letting people recognize I feel that way too. And I think that there is progress waiting to be grabbed.
Well, to branch off of that a little bit, I've interviewed a lot of libertarian candidates over my short time being with the party and before I even joined the party, because the ideology, I believe, is wholeheartedly crisp. I think that where libertarians lose a little bit is that politics is not a nice game. And I think when people talk about the non-aggression principle, I don't think that applies in politics as far as when you're running a campaign to get an idea expressed or anything like that. I understand the idea that you can get more flies with honey than you can with, I forget the expression, but
I'm not sure it's true though.
Right. So with the idea that people are tired and waking up to public policy that's been implemented, that's been detrimental to them, and most people would argue that their security is going to be their most important baseline of anything. Where am I going to get my next meal? Where am I going to house my family? Where am I going to get proper health care? And it just goes down the line.
Agreed.
So it is an accumulation of problems, like I said earlier. And how do we get public policy change through Congress instead of executive order? I think that
which is the way it has to be done, or else it doesn't stick, and it's not ethical, and it's not the democratic way, and you're just back in the Meshuggah. I agree with you about all of that. Look, I think that you've got to, to my mind, and let me preface this by saying, I actually came to libertarianism from the right side, which is to say I grew up as a conservative economist. I wanted to make the world work more efficiently, move to Washington and get involved with, budget matters and teach economics and all of that. That's important. But later on, when I came to libertarianism and recognized the left side, which is to say matters of ethics, matter of leading your own life by your own standards. The important concept that even if socialism worked, it would still be unethical.
Correct.
Even if it worked, government doesn't have the right to make decisions for you. You have a right to make even bad decisions for yourself, let alone good ones. And I think that we need to stop acting like we only think with the right side of our brain. I think that we have to stop saying, oh, it's worth saying, but it's not enough to say the economy will grow more, we'll make more money, deregulation works, less taxation works, you make better decisions about your own lives. Those are all important things to say, so don't get me wrong. But we need to be able to point out real clear, pushing youngsters into a Social Security program that promises them at best a crappy rate of return, at best, and possibly no return at all, is evil and unethical, does not represent our values, does not put a good face on, our democratic institutions, and has got to be phased out. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to take grandma's check away next week. But look, grandma, your grandchildren, you should, Social Security is not their friend. We should not be forcing these people into these programs. And no one else is going to say that. If that's for us to say. And if we don't say it, nobody else will. And for this reason, I believe that not only do we have to make really ethical cases for things, and we can get back to some examples, but I think that it's more than just an opportunity for us. I see it as an obligation because no one else is going to do it. We are, as libertarians, we are the descendants of the people that founded this country, philosophically speaking. No one else cares about the Constitution. Yeah, as libertarians, we'd like to go even further than just getting back to the Constitution in terms of limiting government. But at the very least, we need to fight our way back to a delimited government type of democracy. And look, do you think a Republican is going to stand up for your right to have a defense posture that aligns with your values? That's not where their heads are. A Democrat is going to stand up for your First Amendment rights, your Second Amendment rights, your Fourth Amendment. You think a Republican is going to stand up for your Fourth Amendment rights? That's not going to happen. And so in that sense, that's a call of duty for us. This is an obligation. We need to stand up for Americans just because they're American. We call them brothers and sisters for no other reason, right? They're just Americans. Mm-hmm. Most, don't have a way of appreciating the impact over the years of the erosion of their individual liberties or the expansion of the scale and scope of government. For those of us who do understand it, that creates a real obligation to act on it. And I think that gives us an obligation, whether we like it or not, to do everything we can to speak about our principles in ethical terms, not merely in efficiency terms as the nerdly economists that some of us are.
Right. All right. So I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. You are elected president of the United States. You have been sworn into office. Your cabinet is about to come into office or let's just say what it is, into power as far as on the executive branch.
An unfortunate word, but keep going.
So now with everything that's going on with executive orders, I was reading just a short list of executive orders today.
It's breathtaking.
If you were to write an executive order erasing every single executive order that has ever been presented by a president,
you wouldn't have much government left.
It is outstanding. OSHA wouldn't exist. There are agencies and bureaucrats that would just be wiped out of existence, and the government would probably be reduced by over 50% on a federal level.
It would be reduced by a huge margin, and I'll tell you how you do it. You give a deadline. you in effect, you say we are reversing executive orders because they're unconstitutional per se. I don't even have to read them, right? Now, yeah, you got to pay 2 young attorneys to go through them just to make sure that you're not surprised by anything. But
Correct.
You can pretty much say that they all have to go because they are unconstitutional just per se. And you give a deadline and you give Congress, 180 days. This stuff is all going down the toilet, and let them fight out what it is that they think is worth fighting for. The good news with that process is that you just shove them into gridlock for 6 months. They wouldn't be able to do a damn thing. If you told them that, 7 agencies and 700,000 people are about to be let go by the government, the panic would be so overwhelming, they wouldn't be able to pass a single piece of legislation. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So I agree with you. That's got to be, I would say the second thing that needs to be done in day one. The first thing that I'm a big believer in is appointing libertarians with a lowercase s, if not a lowercase l, if not a capital L, to run agencies that we want to get rid of in the long run. Those that do require legislation to get rid of them. The first step in Washington to getting rid of a group is to make it as irrelevant as possible first. So what you got to do is appoint people whose mission it is to winnow down the mission of the agencies, the size and scope, reach, regulatory profile of these agencies until they're as irrelevant as possible. And then you can try to move legislation to get rid of them. But you've got to undermine their political power as individual power centers, which so often they are. It's always surprising to see the extent to which the Department of Energy has political wings of its own, independent of the White House. And there is no greater example of that than the Federal Reserve System, which is an extremely politically powerful organization. That was a real wake up to me when I got out of school. When I got out of grad school in 91, some year, hundreds of years ago, and I had been studying the Federal Reserve System for years, right? And I think I'm all smart and an expert at monetary policy because I can do the math, right? And then you find out. I spent a lot of years working with Federal Reserve economists, not only when I was at the White House, but when I worked in the banking system as I was a market for free advocates in the banking industry. And a big part of my job was to interface with the regulatory agencies to try to lobby them to reduce regulations, right, and improve competition. And one of the things you find is those people have on their staff people whose job it is to lobby Congress. I'm like, what is up with you? And there is a monolithic way of thinking. And I don't mean any disrespect because the Federal Reserve, I've got a Labrador retriever here who you must have seen a duck or something. I don't know. That must be much more important than what you and I are talking about. The Fed is full of very smart, very well-meaning economists. And they believe what I think all of us used to believe, which is if they could just get smarter and do it right and do it better, they would eventually be able to solve the business cycle. And now we're 100 years into this experiment, and notwithstanding how smart and well dedicated these people are, they have proven, I mean, I'm willing to accept it as proof at this point. I don't believe you can get a smarter bunch, a more dedicated, well-meaning, better educated bunch of hundreds of economists. I think this is as good as we can possibly do. All the computer power in the world, they can't get it right.
Right.
I think for this reason, we need to replace them with a rules-based system. My favorite, of course, is Milton Friedman's idea of freezing the money base and just letting it grow by a fixed increment per year that is predictable. But we can fight about what rule. But we need to replace this idea of discretionary monetary policy where a bunch of people get in a room and decide how much inflation, what interest rates are going to be. That system has not worked. And to learn that the hard way can be frustrating and discouraging because, like I say, you come out of school knowing the math, you think, you're going to help be part of the solution. And it turns out You're quite literally part of the problem, because they've trained you to think that math will overcome the institutional structure, which is really what's problematic.
Well, and I've talked to people about there's two economies in this country. There's the underground economy. There is the illegal economy that the backdoorsmen of the government use,
Yeah.
and then there is the surface economy that they show everybody. So I think that if we do get off of the dollar and get to a centralized digital currency system, that's game over. We're talking the second revolution is probably going to happen in the near future. The monetary system that is in place now is so ingrained in everybody that it has taken away the skill set minds of the people that came to this country as immigrants trying to find a better life. And the education system that has now indoctrinated them into this, well, you go to school for 8 hours, we're going to tell you how to do stuff. Your parents ain't going to be around you enough to control you, and the domino effect happens. So where do we go? I mean, I look at the executive order. I look at the executive order deal as if a president came in and just eliminated the executive orders, you slash government, you slash spending, you did it all from the executive branch's chair without involving Congress, and then saying now Congress,
as much as you could.
And then you say now Congress go to work
after with Congress, which makes them a real bear. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So then you lift all these barricades up on a federal level, and once you eliminate those government bureaucrats, then most of the barricades that hinder business and hinder low-income individuals to reach the middle class, or let's recreate the middle class, because it's going into a two-tier system now where there's rich people and poor people. So to really shift the country like that, and people would people's head was probably spinning. And I thought about it when I was like, let me see what we can do with this interview, because I'm like, he's running for the biggest chair right now, and this is not a country that is meant to be ran by a king, but it's been ran by so-called kings for so long. We have to eliminate all their policies that they've implemented to get back to the people.
Well, you're exactly right. And I'm glad that you put your finger on the challenges of poverty in this country, because there's two things about intergenerational, the real persistent intergenerational poverty that we see in the United States. There are two things worth mentioning. One is you don't see that in other well-developed democracies to the extent to which you see it in the United States. And you don't see it as something that free markets would predict. Persistent intergenerational poverty is the result of bad public policy. And when you become a police officer, and this is a little bit weird. First of all, becoming a police officer is weird, but one of the things that I noticed when I first became a police officer is that you see the effects of bad public policy up close. If you weren't, I used to tell the youngsters, my trainees, this all the time. If you are not a professional economist before becoming a cop, being a cop will turn you into an economist anyway, because you see the bad public policy, you see the effects of bad housing, bad zoning, you see the effects of bad schools, you see the effects of the war on drugs creating black markets and how dangerous they turn out to be. You see the exacerbating effects of layering on top of that what I would argue is the world's most the world's most oppressive criminal justice system. When you layer that on top of the black markets created by the war on drugs, you get a real mess. And I don't just mean, a tolerable one. That's where a lot of the violence comes from. Everything from homicide to suicide. You get the robbing of these youngsters of even their ability to set aspirations for themselves. You get the destruction of communities, of families, of individuals' lives. It's really horrible. And for this reason, also, it is imperative that we drive as much public policy change and reform as possible. Now, you were saying quite correctly that the president is not a king and shouldn't be, which is one of the reasons why we want to reverse, per se, executive orders. But having
Right.
said that, the president does have a lot of influence over public debates on issues over which he or she does not have direct control. States, criminal justice systems, the way we manage police, that I spend so much time talking about, but other issues as well. Schools is a big one. I would argue that school reform is. I know some people are going to argue with me on this, but I'm going to jump in anyway. I think school reform is quite possibly the most important public policy issue of our time. And I know that butts up against concerns that you and I share about war and concerns that you and I share about the potential collapse of our financial system. So I don't take lightly my accusation that the school system that we have is as bad as those. And the reason I say that is because it's so fundamental to the development of our culture. I think it screws up our culture. It screws up the way kids approach life and grow into adults. The lack of entrepreneurialism that we have beaten out of kids, the ability to see through bad politics, bad politicians, and to see a path forward in a new and creative way. That's why I think it's so important. And also because I believe that changes in public policy can make such a difference. Just instituting competition alone, if you made only that change, if you did nothing else but make that change, and there are a lot of other changes that need to be made in teaching, but if you only change the fact that most public schools operate as little fiefdom, monopolies, if that's the only thing that you took down, you would make huge progress. And in one generation, our culture and our economy would both be better off. But having said that, while the president doesn't have control over those, the ability to shift policy debates and conversations in the United States is really powerful. Mm-hmm. I think typically it's been used for really powerful bad reasons. Imagine if a White House was as dedicated to promoting school choice as the last administration, this administration, was dedicated to pushing vaccines. Think about that. So it's clear that the White House can have influence, right?
Well, I think right now Republicans especially are the ones that are asking for, so the argument right now in schools is the LGBT argument, the critical race theory argument, violence in schools. So that is on the Republican side. We need armed police at our school, one, or the teachers need to be armed. And then on the Democratic side is, no, we need less guns on the streets because that's going to, a gun-free zone isn't good enough. We need everybody not to have guns anymore so that we can feel safe. Now, again, this goes back to people's securities and how they feel secure. And it goes back to the ideology that, I'm sorry, but when I grew up in the city of Milwaukee, when I saw the police, I didn't feel anything but anxiety and getting away. I didn't feel security. Yeah. And I don't think people feel security unless they have something that's threatening to them, whether it's a domestic issue or there's the war on drugs and it's two rivals or it's two or a transition that goes bad or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so education is controlled right now by the Department of Education and teachers unions. Yeah. They masked up all the kids. They put them in desks that had dividers.
Yeah, and I would argue the unions are the more important of those two. But yeah, those are the two big forces in it. Mm-hmm.
So when now there's a pushback in the school system themselves. I homeschool my children with my wife. We don't worry about that. We have three. I have an 11-year-old, I have a 10-year-old just turned, and then I have a 3-year-old. So
that's very exciting. In Broward County, Florida, we've got a big homeschool program. And I was just out in, I used to live in Broward County, Florida. Now I live in Virginia. And I just came, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is a very exciting turn of events that I find out you're a homeschooler. I just came back from Portland, Oregon, where people tell me it's the mecca of homeschooling. And the reason I was so excited to hear that is not because I can agree with them, but because that's now the fourth place that has told me they are the mecca of homeschooling. If every place starts to think that, no, we're the ones that got it right,
Yep.
then that's exciting stuff. And it sounds like your house is going to be the new mecca of homeschooling. So good luck with that. And by the way, we're not done fighting until homeschooling families participate the same way private schools need to participate, the same way a public school needs to compete for those dollars.
Well, and I think that one of the I forget the man's name, but it's fund students, not systems. That's probably and we've thrown billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars at the Department of Education. It does not do anything. It's this problem or this problem. No, it's the bureaucrats. It's where the money goes. It's not having any accountability. Yet again, it's unchecked government, no matter how you slice it.
It's exactly.
I think that
that's exactly what it is. And the school board, is supposed to keep a check on that. And to be fair, there are certain school boards that do better jobs than others, but largely school boards are driven by, former teachers, people who are pro teachers, current teachers, principals that used to be teachers. You get where I'm going. It's not, it's a politically captured organization driven by the teachers unions.
Well, and it's also their individual security to keep that position. So let's not make any waves. Let me keep my salary. There's plenty of perks here.
Reform-minded group.
Correct. So it's people go there with good intentions, supposedly, but then there's people that do go there with malicious intent just to keep the system going, so that either their buddy, their pal, their friend keeps their security, and the cycle continues.
And what's really scary is how many of them are true believers. They actually think that private schools are a threat, that public schools are the only way to go, and that we need to keep as much of the 100% of the money as possible in the public school system. There are true believers out there, and I find them as frightening as any.
Well, and that goes back to their security. And, I believe that conspiracy theory was a term that was created by the CIA to say that, oh, well, no, this is to deter people from having all-inclusive information and only to take one small portion of it.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. If they could have convinced us that John Kennedy killed himself, they would have tried. Yes,
and I think that you brought up Kennedy. Now his nephew is in the running. So I looked at the list today. I think I counted over 100 people that are running for president in multiple different categories. From the freedom of.
Are you going to interview every one of them? I'm going to be jealous.
I don't think so. I would love to have a debate on this show with yourself, Chase, and every libertarian that's running, along with Lars, and I believe there's Anthony. It's something that, because we are in a very dynamic time right now to get our information back to the public ear, who have given up their freedom of choice to the freedom of the government gives us our choice, and there isn't one. It's like George Carlin said, it's an illusion of choice. I look at the consolidations of corporations to where one giant corporation owns supposedly all the competition, and it's becoming monopolized again to where it's like there's a big power grab for huge corporations like BlackRock to suck up a bunch of assets and property, which brings their value up in this current monetary system, and then they can buy more and more and more, and they have influence all over the place. It's like we really need a dramatic change in how people think in this country, how people operate in their communities, how businesses operate, and get out of this, well, this is what we've been doing for 40, 50 years. It's good for us. We don't care about that generation.
You're 100% right. Government is not your friend. And the sooner people wake up to that notion, the better off they will be, and the rest of us. And this is why it's so important that we play a major role in the American political process going forward. I'm a little disappointed to hear about 100. That means 99 disappointments, and I look forward to every single one of them.
Another one. I didn't ask Lars this, but I will ask you. if you were to go in and have the executive branch be able to do as much change in public policy as possible, would you fear assassination?
No.
Or do you think that they're, like Jesse Ventura says, you're going to get taken down into a little room. You're going to sit in this chamber. They're going to tell you how it goes. And then they're going to say, well, either you follow the program or you might not wake up tomorrow morning. I don't know if I
Yeah.
believe that, but he said that in a either a testimony or something like that.
Well,
That's what happened
look, I
when he
have
got
no
elected
proof that
governor.
he's. Yeah, I have no proof that he's wrong about that. But there's two reasons why I don't fear an assassination. Number one, I would take steps to prevent it. So I don't mean to say I'm trying to be naive and just say let the world roll out. It's going to. I don't believe in that. I'm not a big believer in blind fate over blind faith. I grew up. I was raised by a Lutheran mother and a Calvinist father. But I got to say, I'm all about free will, and you got to take matters into your own hands. And that means that you've got to be very careful about the people with whom you surround yourself, not only in a public policy sense, but in a security sense. Yep. And as a cop, I get that. As a cop, you learn certain things that you kind of wish weren't true. Including some things you kind of wish that maybe your better life would be led if you didn't know about them, even if they were true.
But that's wisdom.
Some of those truisms are that institutions themselves, they take on a brain of their own. There is such a thing as groupthink. There is such a thing as institutional culture, and you need to be very careful of that. And don't ever forget that the Secret Service is a part of the Treasury Department, and that means it has its own political aspirations, and these things matter. And people inside of these agencies, they do interact with other agencies that also have their own political agenda, and that is not always in line with the White House, but they sure as hell want it to be. And so I'm not trying to be naive. There are steps that you could take. But the other thing that needs to be said is that I believe that the next presidential assassination, I have no doubt that there will be another one, right? We can all hope it's 100 years from now instead of 10 years from now. But the idea that there will not be another one, I think that is truly naive. I am hopeful to the extent to which there is one, we will have a better apparatus in place to learn sooner than the last time some of the forces that were behind it. So I would hope it would be a teaching experience, particularly if it were me. It would almost be too obvious, which is why, of course, great pains would have to be taken to be able to blame it on somebody else. And that also speaks to the need for institutionalization of the changes you make. And it also means that you've got to educate along the way. You've got to bring the American public along. So it's one thing to make these changes, as you said, make the deep changes as quickly, as hard as possible. But you've got to explain it along the way so that you've got a certain proportion of American. You're not going to have everybody, but you need a certain proportion of the American public behind you to lay the groundwork for the next round. Because whether you go out feet first, head first, or chest first, you're eventually going to leave. And you don't, that's, 4 months or 8 years, you've got to lay the groundwork for it to last for a long, long time, or else, thanks for your effort, but you really haven't changed anything that's going to matter.
Well, and we have the statistics of only half the country votes. Statistically, only half the country votes.
That's
so
right.
What I see going on is usually the half of the people that are like, oh, just leave me alone. I'm good. As long as I'm just over here. I'm not bothering anybody. I'm just over here. I think the sleeping giant in the country is that the other half of the country that does not participate in politics, is now like, you are infringing on my security. You are infringing on my way
Now
of
it
being. You are
matters.
trying, right. Now it's approached my doorstep. Now I have to do something because it's gone way, way, way out of control. It feels to me like it's another tidal wave, kind of like what happened during the civil rights movement. You had,
Yeah.
young trying to change major public policy, major societal structures. You're coming out of a very long war, and then drugs are introduced, and now, oh, well, we got a war on drugs, and then there's a war on poverty, and there's a war on this, and the war mindset has been set generationally. So now, when it comes to changing
Yeah. Way
public
too much
policy,
deference to government. Yeah. Keep going.
it's a war think that this sleeping giant, and now this is just my hypothesis, that sleeping giant has that war think mindset, has been sleeping in the weeds, and is like, okay, now this is enough. We're done with the craziness on this side. We're done with the craziness on this side. Now it's time to wake up to a, a, a libertarian mindset that I think most people have now. As
Yeah.
if if the public policy changes to where there are no more barricades as far as open trade, if you want to trade coca leaves again, we can trade coca leaves. If you have regulation that says it's the highest purity that's ever been out there, whatever, then you can supply those markets without having the detriment of crime. And people usually don't make choices when there's not an influence of, oh, well, check this out, it's illicit, it's illegal, it's
It
that
changes the
fun.
dynamic completely. Yeah.
Correct.
Agreed.
So, and then you introduce the economics of that, of the free market, and then the boom can happen naturally, as long as everybody understands that there's not going to be the incarceration of massive amounts of people, because this is just how we've done it for. And then you can have communities have their families back together, the nuclei. You can have the
Yeah.
people that are trying to provide the best way that they know possible. You get rid of the poverty. You get rid of it's like, if people would just get out of their own
That
ideological
former
suffering
headspace.
place where they just don't want to walk through that door, because they've been programmed to their security is at risk. The
Yeah.
security is
Let me
at
play
risk.
off of something that you said a moment ago, which I think is so important. The idea of it now, that now it has come to my doorstep. I do believe that the traditional pool of people that have been involved in politics aligns with a traditional set of viewpoints. In other words, part of the reason they've been involved is because they've been involved with certain issues. So you see a lot of Republicans involved because they're pro-growth and they believe that the economy ought to work better. And you see a lot of Democrats, involved because big government was their thing and the government is here to help you. And we believe in that. And so we support the Democratic Party. And I believe that it is not completely true that the people who don't participate in politics wouldn't. I think that there is a large proportion of the people who have not traditionally participated in politics, a large proportion of those people who would participate if the conversation were different. Trump, for example, brought people in because they were interested in a very different conversation than what they were having with traditional Republicans. Bernie Sanders,
Right.
similarly, on the blue side. And I believe that if we can change the conversation a little bit, we will appeal to a different group of people. And I think that a part of that is the nature of the issues that, as you just said, have come to their doorstep. In other words, a lot of people maybe traditionally wouldn't have participated in politics, but now you're coming after my kids. That doesn't feel like participating in politics. That feels like protecting that feels different. That's looking out for my family. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to be a political person to take care of business when you come to influence my kids in a way that doesn't fit with what in the United States we always viewed as a very simple dignity of having the right to raise your kids the way that you saw fit. And that feels like it's changing. As you said, it's coming to parents' doors in a way that will get people involved that haven't been traditionally. And I would point out that the same thing feels that way to me with regard to criminal justice, that a lot of people who have not been traditionally involved in politics could be motivated if they felt like there was a way to make a difference, because I don't think a large proportion of people want to riot in the streets. They're more than before, and some, I get all that. But what we see on TV in a riot is hundreds or thousands of people who are pissed off.
Yep.
But I think that for every one of the people we see in the streets, there are a dozen more that stayed home and they're just as pissed. Maybe,
and they're probably more calculated. They're probably more calculated, and that's why they sat at home. They're not as emotionally charged. They are sitting and critically thinking about the situation, going, okay, now there's these choices that I have to make, and now we go from
maybe
there.
I'm not going to go downtown and break windows, but will I vote for a fucking libertarian? Yeah, I would, because I'm not politically motivated. I'm not that guy. Maybe I'm not that gal, but I am pissed enough to get off my keister on election day and do something I haven't done before. And that's, poke the eye of the man, the Republican administration, the Democratic administration, do something differently. And I think the third bucket that aligns with that is the anti-war movement. The Republican Party, never, don't even talk about it, but the Democratic Party has left behind any semblance of attracting an anti-war crowd. They have just completely given that up. And when I was younger, when I was your age and younger, there were occasionally a Democratic politician or two who would raise that flag. And good for RFK Jr. for doing it. Good for him. If he can move the Democratic Party in the right direction, then you do you. But I'm not optimistic that he's going to disrupt that train anytime soon.
I think that being a lawyer, he presents lawsuits and then he's doing his thing as a lawyer. I think that's what he's been doing for the past 20 years, besides, putting out books and stuff like that. So I'm not a big RFK Jr. fan. I think that he is another front man that has no integrity inside. I think he's just a hollow shell of an individual. That's my personal opinion on him. As far as I'm concerned, he can join his uncle and his dad. I'm not a particular fan of RFK. I think that he is profiting off of things that really are concerns for people when it comes to vaccines. And now it is education. Now it is lockdowns. That's fine. You are running a campaign for president as a normal politician would. That's fine. I don't promote RFK Jr. If I mention his name, it's only for the competition. I think that libertarians are true to principles, and it's nice that he's trying to do that, and it's going to get some ears on the situation. But I don't think I think the people that are really going to change this country are the ones that didn't vote and participate. They're the ones not entrapped into the security of the system.
I agree wholeheartedly, and it doesn't take enough of those people to come to a third of the vote even. If those people come off the bench and they represent 10 or 15% of the voting population, man, that changes a lot, because you pull 10 or 15% of the voting population from that pool. You pull 10 or 15% of the voting population from Republicans who recognize that Donald Trump is not their savior. People from the Democratic side who represent, a more rational future than voting for Joe Biden again. Part of the, it's funny, part of the reason that there's such an opportunity in 2024 for the Libertarian Party is because of the growing authoritarianism, the bad public policy, all of that. But it's funny that there is another element to it, which is they just have crappy leadership. They have crappy candidates. I mean, even by their own standards, a huge portion of the Republican Party is not happy with Donald Trump. And yet it looks like he has more following than everybody else in their party. And a heck of a proportion of the Democratic Party is not happy with their leader. So it's
Well,
a huge opportunity.
do you think that Trump was the roadblock for the Ukraine funding that just now found another 500 billion or whatever it is out of thin air to give to another country to
Yeah, I
fight a
do.
war that they started by
Yeah,
bombing their own people, but we funded it? That's a whole nother conversation to
it
get
is a whole
into
nother
about why
conversation.
this is going on.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame because while there's no getting around the fact that you have to blame Moscow, you cannot condone Vladimir Putin's behavior, but nor can you stick your head in the sand and say that we haven't contributed to creating an environment of fear in Moscow.
Mhm.
Look, it is no great secret that a lot of Russian public policy revolves around paranoia and fear. And
Mhm.
some of that is because, they have authoritarian leaders who leverage fear as a matter of art. That is a big part of it, right? But it
Right.
also needs to be said that, their history has suggested that being slightly paranoid has an element of rationality to it. Well, knowing that, whatever you blame their paranoia on, you got to recognize that it's there.
Mhm.
You cannot bring NATO to their border and then say, we're leaving open the possibility of bringing Ukraine in as well. We have no intention of reducing our forward deployment ever, notwithstanding the fall of the Berlin Wall, notwithstanding the fall of the Soviet Union, notwithstanding our ability to project technology, notwithstanding the difficulty of the Russian economy, notwithstanding the evidence that we saw in the Russian military's inability to overrun places like Georgia and the challenges that they face there. No one should be surprised that, well, and if you were surprised, that's fine. We will never be surprised again that the Russian military is just not that formidable. They, in a ground sense, they stink. We need to be careful of their nuclear capabilities because that is a big lead in to the potential for World War III. But the
Mhm.
idea that we need hundreds of thousands of troops forward deployed because we need to protect Europe from Russia is, how do I say this politely? Bad thinking. Let's leave it at that.
Well, I mean, we're approaching an hour here. We've touched on a lot of topics. I just want to touch on Ukraine just a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that when we look at the overall situation of getting out of Afghanistan and knowing that that wasn't a great situation to begin with, and all the equipment that was just left there
Yeah.
because of the exit.
Yeah.
Now we have funneled, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars to another country.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Where we're also going to
how
leave
do,
equipment.
and then war sells. So now all you hear about is Ukraine, 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 Russia, Ukraine, Russia. So it's like, if I look at it from like a psyop kind of point of view. We were Afghanistan, Iraq for this many years. Then it was now we have Trump that's this for this many years. Russia, 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 Russia. Now we have Ukraine. Oh, the Ukraine phone call with Trump. Then Trump is no longer in office. Now we have Biden. Now we get out of Afghanistan.
Yep.
Oh,
Bingo.
war's over. Bring the troops home. Now all the money's being funded to Ukraine. War,
An hour
war, war,
later,
war.
an hour after leaving Afghanistan. Yep. Keep going.
And so from my point of view, I don't really care why it's happening. I just want it to end. One
Yep.
for let's stop killing each other over dumb shit. Let's just end
Yep.
it because that's ignorance. I don't like your religion. I don't like where you live. I don't like the language you speak. It's all ignorant. We know what this is. This is about changing the global economy and how world banks operate. That's what this is. It's a giant money transfer funnel that is being manipulated, and they're trying to do it as fast as they can. That's why they printed 50, it seems like $50 trillion in the past 4 years to, I don't know what it is, 20, 25 trillion, or it's
Yeah.
some
Our debt is
astronaut, and they're
enormous.
just
Our debt
spending it as
is
fast as they
like
can.
31 trillion. That's right.
and then the Defense Department can't pass an audit. They don't know where it's going.
Right.
It's all unaccounted for, and people are just like, "What are we doing?"
Right.
So it seems like with that going on, we're approaching 2024. It's going to be where do we start, from domestic to foreign policy to international banking to what are we doing with all of our troops, our military? What's going on with all these instability in the countries all over we have
Yep.
Pakistan and India. We have uh,
Yep.
China and Taiwan. We have North Korea, South Korea. We
Many
have uh,
flashpoints.
it's getting to the point where it's going to reach a head,
Yep.
and I don't think a lot of people are prepared for it.
Unfortunately, I agree with you wholeheartedly. We need a culture shift in the sense that we need the public conversation to be revolving around staying out of war instead of how great it is that we're defending democracy in Ukraine, which is absolutely somewhere between silly and dumb. There is a culture shift to be had. And I do believe that public policy is always downstream of culture. But I believe that, as you were saying earlier, that there is a sleeping giant in the sense that people already are so skeptical of our strategic capabilities to achieve anything that the American public would consider actual victories, right? Mm-hmm. Achieving something that's actually in our interest. There is so much skepticism there already that I think the culture just needs to be given an opportunity to recognize itself. I just think that we need to shift the conversation. If we could, for example, incentivize CNN to have a rational conversation once in a while instead of just being a pro-Ukraine mouthpiece, a pro-White House mouthpiece, because the White House is a pro-Defense Department mouthpiece, because the Defense Department is a pro-industrial complex mouthpiece. It all just flows in the wrong direction. And that's why we're in such a problematic environment. I do believe that foreign policy in the long run has to be run from a point of honest reflection of what the American people's interests are. And that's not what we've had. So, for example, we need to be able to say openly and honestly to the Europeans, just to take, each of these theaters separately. We need to be able to say to the Europeans first, it's not really in our interest to be participating in NATO. To be honest, I'm not certain NATO is in your interest, but I'm not going to give you as an American a lecture on that. So here's your 24-month heads up. We're going to start, pulling troops back. If you're really still paranoid about the paranoid nation of Russia, then this is your heads up. You better start spending 3.5% of GDP on your military industrial complex, because we're not going to be there as a backstop. I don't think it's a good idea fiscally. I don't think it's a good idea ethically. And I damn well know it's not a good idea militarily. Then you have to go to Taiwan and the people who invest in Taiwan, even more importantly, and have pretty much the same conversation, which is, I'm sorry that over the past 20 years, we had a policy that said we were not going to be open and honest about whether it is one China or two. But here's the truth of the matter is, and by the way, Justin, I recognize that not all of this is sort of television ready, but it is phone call ready. Whereas a president should probably be hesitant about saying all of this in day one in front of a television, you can start saying it by telephone. And that conversation has to be in Taiwan, something along the lines of, notwithstanding our strategic ambiguity the past couple of decades, let me be perfectly clear. We are not going to back up Taiwan with troops on the ground or even planes in the air. So if you have invested $20 billion in a chip plant in Taiwan, you might start thinking about Singapore or Omaha, Nebraska. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do, where to do it. But if you made that investment in Taiwan because you thought the U.S. Army was going to bail you out, then you can, start strategically thinking very, very differently. And the reason this is so important is because we have gotten ourselves into the situation where we believe that we need to back up Taiwan because we have accidentally allowed companies to think that we would. So now we're stuck in this self-fulfilling prophecy where we are strategically on the hook for Taiwan to keep churning out chips, right? Silicon microchips that we seem to be incapable of living without. And I appreciate that. I'm not trying to deny our technological reliance. What I'm saying is it was artificially induced by leading people to believe that investing in Taiwan was just as safe as investing in Tennessee. And it's not true. And we need to be honest with people like that before it's too late. I do believe it may well be too late today, but at least as soon as possible, we've got to nip in the bud this idea of strategic ambiguity, whether it's in Taiwan or South Korea or any place else. Ambiguity does not work in foreign policy or any other relationship for that matter. I know that you're teaching your 3 kids this now, that you need to be honest with people or everything just falls apart.
Yeah, and I wish I could touch on my next topic, but we're already over an hour. I have, because I was going to touch on immigration, and just one brief thing I'm going to say is that we have the idea that immigrants are being brought to this country, displaced all across the country to vote a certain way. I think also that there has been self-imported immigrants that came to this country with the idea that it presented the dream, the American dream. You can come to this country, be a great individual, be a part of your community, and make it financially. You can be comfortable. You can have the conveniences and the comforts of the American life. I think that poverty in this country compared to other countries is like living in a mansion versus living in a stone cave in some situations. When you talk about what very, very harsh poverty looks like in other countries.
You're exactly right.
Now, I'm not going to get too big into it because that's my idea on immigration is that people come to this country illegally and they're going to do things just because that's what they're told to do. And then you got people that come to this country with that same old adage, I'm going to make the life for myself and nobody's going to stop me. And I hope you're not in my way because you're going to get rolled over because this is the land of opportunity. So I'm going to leave it there. I want you to let people know your final message. Let them know where they can find you, any events that you got going on in the near future, where you're going to be campaigning at. Let them know you can take the mic for the next 3 minutes.
On immigration too. I'll just summarize by saying I believe that we need a much more pro-immigrant policy and a much more pro-immigration policy. I think those are 2 different things. I do believe that we needed more dignified policy. We talked about black markets being created with the drug markets, for example. And I believe that one of the problems, I spent a couple of days down at the border. I met with law enforcement there, Customs and Border Patrol, as well as the sheriff's office. I met with ranchers that have property on the border. I met with leading libertarians in the area. And I definitely came away impressed that most Americans, myself included, shame on me, did not appreciate the scale, the scope of the human trafficking problem. And it's part and parcel of what happens when you create a black market, which is to say criminalize something that the culture is not ready to give up. And so you see people willing to do absolutely anything to get in the United States, to your point. And that usually, I don't know about usually, it often includes a human trafficker to get to the border. And then very often includes a human trafficker coordinated by cell phone or walkie-talkie on the other side of the border. And it leads to indentured servitude, in effect, modern slavery. It leads to forced prostitution. It's absolutely horrific what it leads to. And this is on us. It is not enough for us to say, well, we didn't understand the black markets were going to be created when we imposed the drug prohibition. No, well, maybe you didn't know it at the moment because, you know, you weren't an economist, or because you didn't pay attention to the last prohibition, or because you just don't know how to read a book. But at this point, you know, okay, there is no excuse anymore. And the same thing with the border. maybe you didn't realize 100 years ago or even 20 years ago, but now if you don't understand that human trafficking and black markets are the result of bad public policy and trying to criminalize something that the culture can't give up and won't give up and arguably shouldn't give up, then you're just not paying enough attention. And for this reason, although I'm not a fan of federal resources being used for almost anything, if there is one thing that I would suggest as we're downplaying the size of the Defense Department, I would migrate some of those officers to the border to adjudicate cases rapidly enough so we can get these people in here. And I would do that in a fashion that says, unless we have a particular reason not to admit you, unless we can prove to ourselves, if to no one else, that there is a reason that you shouldn't be in the United States, then you should be in the United States. We used to be able to vet people into the White House, Justin, in 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But for reasons that only a bureaucrat can understand, it takes years to tell someone that they're allowed to work in the United States, which I think is bass-ackward. It seems to me that we ought to get those people in as fast as we can. And when they say, am I allowed to work? We say, you're not allowed not to work, mister. You're going to work tomorrow. Pick a bus and God be with you, because the federal government is not going to be either backing you up or pushing you in any particular direction. So I would be okay with tightening up the border for the purpose of moving people into the legal channel, dedicating enough resources to pick up the pace in that channel so that you can show up at the gate, get vetted in a matter of hours, or at worst case scenario, a couple of days, and be issued enough documentation that the federal government wouldn't stop you from working. And ultimately, we need to get to a place where it's none of the government's business, whether you have papers or not. If a business wants to hire you, then they should be allowed to do so, even if you're from France.
Yeah. Well, Americans, when they go to other countries, they still have to pay American taxes on the money that they make, no matter what country they're in. So that
is repulsive, by the way.
It's true.
It is true, and it's repulsive. And I apologize. I promised you only 30 seconds. I think I burned up 3 minutes there. But yeah,
you're good. You're good.
Go to MikeTerMaat.com or goldnewdeal.org. My real contact information is there. Give me a call, give me a text, give me an email. If you're mad at me, you want to punch me in the face, tell me why. If you love the campaign, don't bother emailing, I guess. That's fine. If you want to volunteer for the campaign, if you want to come to work for the campaign, we have lots of stuff for people to do. And if you got a few dollars and you don't want them anymore, the campaign can always use that. So, but the most fun is at goldnewdeal.org and just read about the policy.
Excellent. Mike, I thought it was a great conversation. If you could stay just for a second after we get off the live, I'm going to end the broadcast here, and go hit those websites, get out there, get in your communities, and stay free. Don't let everybody make decisions for you. You have your choices, and stay free. Good night, everybody. I'm the Lunatic Libertarian. Get after Mike ter Maat and go look at his information. Check out the Libertarian Party and see what people that are trying to leave you alone are trying to introduce as public policy. Everybody out there, peace, love. Thank you.